And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Chef Canarsie.
Welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. This is one of two shows that are coming out today. This is a little bit of a different show, mainly because I get a lot of questions every week regarding this genre and the mob and different crime families and etc. So I figured one of the unique things to do would be to just collect them all before the show and just go ahead and answer as many as I can. I've picked 8 of the bunch that was submitted yesterday. So what I'm going to do is go through and kind of answer them in serious detail. Normally when people answer questions like these, they give a 1, 2, or 3 sentence answer and they move on to the next. But I'm going to go in depth with most of these as much as I can. And then what I will do is, because I know earlier in the week I had said that I was going to do this at the beginning of the Carlos Marcello show, but I'm not going to do that because it just time constraints and etc. I think it's just easier if I come right out and just answer the questions here, and I'll put it out as its own kind of question and answer show to begin with, and then later on this afternoon, after this one debuts, obviously the Marcello show will be out, and that's going to be a very long show, and that's really why I wanted to come on and just kind of answer these questions beforehand, because the Marcello show is just going to be, it's so in-depth, it's so big, it's very hard to do in an hour, and if I do it the way I want to do it and it pushes the hour and a half boundary, I can't imagine adding another hour answering questions, just because, relatively speaking, when you look at the analytics of radio, what the average person will listen to, what they won't listen to, so there's sort of scheming going on involved in here with this, but What I'm going to do is we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to get to some questions that are really actually incredible questions. I was kind of surprised with how good they were. Some will be more in-depth than others. Some parts of them I will answer, some parts I won't. I just sort of kind of threw it all into one big lump thing here, and hopefully everybody enjoys the questions. But I wanted to thank everybody for actually submitting them. There were way too many for me to go through, but I went through about 40 or 50 of them, and we picked 8 that we thought that were reasonable, that I don't have to give like a 25-minute explanation to. And anytime anybody asks me a question about a particular mob guy or whatever, what I have a tendency of doing is I will give you the background on the guy. Because if somebody brings up a story they heard or a rumor they heard, it helps the audience if they know who I'm talking about. So there's going to be a little biographical stuff thrown in with this. But anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for submitting the questions. And when we come back, we're going to get right into it. I'm going to answer them to the best of my abilities. And then we'll cut it short today and jump into the Marcello show, which will be coming out after this. So stay tuned. We'll be back on Mob Talk Radio.
What you got, you rascal, you. I wonder what you got, you rascal, you. I wonder what you got, makes my wife think you so hot. And I wonder what you got, you rascal, you.
And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. If you are coming here expecting to hear the Carlos Marcello show, that show will be coming out after this on a totally different radio show. So we're actually releasing two shows today, which is kind of a pain in the ass to do, but it is what it is. So anyway, we took to social media and we're asking people to submit questions that they wanted to sort of have the answer to that were obviously genre related. So out of, I don't know, must have been 50, 60, 70 questions, I picked about 8. Some of them had multiple questions attached. So if when I'm answering the question you submitted, if I don't answer the entire thing, it's probably because you asked me 10 things at once. And just for time constraints and the fact that I have another show to do, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but also give you sort of the in-depth answers that you need. And a good example would be if somebody brings up a murder that took place and asks about a certain gangster that got killed for whatever reason. Well, it doesn't do the audience any good if they don't know who I'm talking about. So I'm going to go back in time, so to speak, with a lot of this and sort of give you the biographical information that goes with it. And, hopefully we can do this type of thing a little bit more often than we do. Normally I just answer them simply through messages, but you can go on Facebook to Mob Talk Radio, send a message, we'll respond and get back to you. You can get us over on Twitter at Real Mob Talk 7. And there's also the True Crime page, blog, and the Mob Talk Radio blog, which is becoming very, very busy, obviously, with some of the stuff on Philadelphia. So if you want to get updated on Philadelphia and all that's going on in the mob, go ahead and jump over to the blogs and get your information there. We post links all the time on Twitter and on Facebook, so you can check us out there. So let's get to these questions, and they're very good questions to begin with. Some of them are more in-depth than others. And this is not in any particular order, not the order they came in. Casey McCracken, do you think the time has come for the government to revamp WITSEC or scrap it altogether? Isn't it just rewarding rats? I don't want to talk a lot about WITSEC, and the reason why is because John A. Gotti Jr., Richard Stratton, and Chris Kasparosa are doing a documentary, WITSEC Mafia, together, and I don't really want to piggyback on anything that they are doing. So I think the best way for me to answer this is WITSEC works. It seems to me it only works when they're going for the big fish in the sea. I without rehashing John Gotti or Sammy Gravano or Whitey Bulger or Joe Valachi, John A. Light, or any of these people, without rehashing all of that, I think the best answer that I can truly and honestly give you is that the system doesn't work. It rewards informants. It essentially forgives their behavior as long as they're telling on somebody bigger than them. And what we find, at least historically, Greg Scarpa, these guys committed atrocious crimes and murders while on the FBI payroll. So to say that system works, you can go back to elementary school, where there's teacher will leave the room and she'll ask somebody to write the names on the board of any child or any classmate that talks out of turn or talks while they're out of the room, write their name on the board. It's creating a snitch atmosphere, and you're rewarding the snitch for telling on somebody else. You're a good boy, you told on somebody, that's a good thing to do. And that's not a quality that I think is good. I wouldn't raise my kids that way. I don't think that anybody should tell on anybody. But in the case of what we're talking about, WITSEC has long made it known that as long as you give them some, and it doesn't even have to be true, and that's kind of the biggest problem. As long as you give them, it's like the old saying, as long as Sammy Gravano gives them John Gotti, it doesn't matter what Sammy Gravano says. He could say whatever he wanted to. He can say whatever he wanted to. Now, there's a theory going around, well, maybe it's more than a theory, that he was having some sort of tryst with his brother-in-law, which is why he killed him, didn't want to get out that he was swinging both ways, which would make sense. It would lend itself to a lot of things that I hear on the street, but at the end of the day, we have a system that rewards others for telling, and it's not exactly right. If there was oversight on what they were saying, and it was proven to be 100% accurate to the information they were giving, then what can you do? What can you say at that point? You can't really make the argument. You don't have to like it, but you can't make that argument. But in the case of Gravano, the case of Joe Valachi, the case of John A. Light, they're all liars. They lie about everything. They throw their mother under the bus if they think it gets them out of jail, because none of these guys are men. They're cowards. And the government likes to reward cowards. They've been doing it for a long time now, and I don't expect that to change. So can you revamp the system? No, because it's a reward system, and they're never going to change that. But I tell you what, from a government aspect, if you just threw the fucking gauntlet at these people, all of them, like you want to eradicate organized crime, give them all the death penalty. That's how you eradicate something. You don't justifiably take a scumbag like Sammy Gravano who kills 19 people on his own accord doing what he wants, but because he wants to tell on somebody a little bigger than him, a little smarter than him, a little tougher than him, because he can't do a day in jail, you're going to forgive 19 murders for that? It just doesn't make sense. So, does it need to be revamped? Absolutely. Do they need to scrap it? I would say yes, but I also think they should scrap RICO laws too. I think RICO laws are unjust, and I think they're ridiculous. And it was just one more way for the government to catch up to the mob. So, I will let John A. Gotti, Chris Casparosa, and Richard Stratton cover the WITSEC portion of all of that. That's sort of above my pay grade, but it does need oversight. But we've seen time and time again, oversight doesn't really mean shit. Look at Greg Scarpa. So I hope that answered your question. Robert Wilkins says, do you think Vincent the Chin Gigante give tacit consent to the Paul Castellano hit because he knew... Let me restart this because this is atrocious. All right, do you think Vincent the Chin Gigante give tacit consent to the Paul Castellano hit because he knew Big Paul was cheating everybody in the Concrete Club, and also because he knew John Gotti would be able to keep control of the Gambino's white-collar rackets? Okay, the best way for me to answer this is that I don't think he gave tacit consent. I think he gave off-the-record consent. I've been long-winded about this before on a lot of other shows, but I really do think that Chin knew what was going on. He didn't come outwardly vocal and say, yes, absolutely, go ahead and do this, but he didn't say no either. He sort of kind of went along with it because he knew he was taking it in the ass as far as the Concrete Club. He wasn't getting his fair dividends from it. And I think that mob business, it was good for it. Look, first of all, it turned out very good for Vinny Gigante in the end, especially when John Gotti took over. And I have gone on record to say this because there's a lot of detractors that will say that under John Gotti it's all negative, and it really isn't. Under John Gotti, these guys made $400 million a year. He revamped the whole entire financial structure of the Gambino crime family. The guy was a genius as far as financials. He kept everybody in line, used violence when he needed to use violence, and the record speaks for itself. But all you ever typically hear is, well, he got caught talking on wiretaps. Half the fucking mob gets caught talking on wiretaps. It's no different than anybody else. I think because of his elevated situation and because of the power he had, a lot of people use that sort of like a piñata with a stick. They like to tap that because that's the only thing that they can go with. But the reality is I think that the Chin did not give consent, but he didn't say no either. And I go back to the Frankie DeChico hit. John Gotti and Frankie look nothing alike. To say that they botched the car bomb, no, that was eye for an eye, one for one, and the Chin stopped after that. And he stopped after that because, you know what, off the record, it looked like the Chin was doing what he was supposed to do, tried to get revenge. They screwed it up, so there you go, it's over, it's done with, we tried, move on. But then shortly after that, John Gotti has meetings with Vinny the Chin Gigante, and they split up Garment District, they split up Concrete. So there was a vested monetary interest for Vincent Gigante to be on sort of Team Gotti at that point. Outwardly, he couldn't. He couldn't vocalize that because it goes against what they believe in. But I said this the other day, but if you go back in history, you look at Vinny the Chin tried to kill Frank Costello. Vinny the Chin was directly responsible for Angelo Bruno getting killed, whether you want to believe that or not. He's a snake in the grass. He was very Machiavellian, very shrewd. Carlo Gambino killed 3 bosses himself. So this is nothing new to the mob. The idea of overthrowing the government, so to speak, Mafia style, that's been done the same way for 100 years now. So to say that John Gotti did anything different than anybody prior to him or after him did is bullshit. He did exactly what other people have done. You cut the head off the snake to kill it, and that's just as simple as that. So does he give consent and say, yeah, go ahead and kill him? No, he doesn't. But off the record, he did. I don't think he shed a tear. Him and Paul had a lot of, legitimate businesses together, but those all came to Gigante when that was over anyway. So Gigante got what he wanted. He played shrewd businessman. He took a shot, got Frankie, made it look like, they wanted to get Gotti. I don't believe anything that Gaspipe Casso said about the situation. I think the guy's a liar from that aspect. But no, he didn't give consent, but boy, he sure reaped the benefits of that, didn't he? So I hope that answers that question. This one is coming from Ben Eberhard. What does the mob look like today, and have they learned it's best to kill or only kill when they have to? What's the easiest racket to be involved in with the less amount of jail time? And do you think with active terrorism in the country, do you think the FBI sort of left the mob alone, and that's why they're bigger and better? I've always said that. The first thing I will say is this: is with after post 9/11, a lot of the gangbuster squads and a lot of the OC squads run by the FBI were relegated to other parts of the city to deal with other important matters. They still have OC, FBI squads looking after the mob, but I think you're right to the extent that they effectively sort of didn't forget about them, but there were other pressing issues. Does that make them bigger and better? No, not so much, because we're still seeing like massive indictments every 2 or 3 weeks. 50 guys picked up here, 16 guys here. So are they bigger and better and badder? Not necessarily. The mob today is probably more underground than it's ever been. The days of standing outside of a social club are over. They've been over for 20 years. It doesn't mean they're not out there, but from that perspective, and as far as the killing aspect of that, killing is depending on who you talk to. And I always like John A. Gotti's answer to this when he was asked about murder. I don't know if you can ever justify murder. So there you go. I don't know if I can justify it. Certain situations I can definitely justify murder, but is it better to kill or to just simply, to kill for method, kill for reason? Look, the ends have to justify the means in this life, and that is really the ultimatum for people. And that lifestyle that's the end. When they've reached the point where they can no longer deal with it, they do it. Now, if you want to go back to like Nicky Scarpa, Nicky Scarpa did it because he liked it. He enjoyed it. It was exciting to him. So that's a guy that killed out of motivation for 2 reasons. 1, he enjoyed it, and 2, it sent a message that, by the way, if anybody steps out of line, this is what's going to happen. So today's mob is a little bit different, even though they found 2 bodies in the last, week and a half, 2 weeks now. The mob is still going to use murder as an ends to justify the means, but it's a little different now. It has to be. They're too out there. They're too up front and center. So I think you would probably be more hard pressed to see that you're going to just see bodies wash up on shore, so to speak, or bodies found. But I think the days of shootouts in the streets are definitely over. Okay, this one is coming from Elio Forcina. Hey, I know Elio. He's my lawyer. Oh, he's got a good one, guys. Did the FBI really hire Greg Scarpa to torture the Klansmen to find the location of the murdered Queens college students in Mississippi? Now, if you are not familiar with Greg Scarpa, go look him up. I don't want to get into a whole deal with Scarpa, but Scarpa was a maniac, a psychopath, a killer, a murderer, and a rat for some 30 years. And one of the stories that Linda Shiro has told, and keep in mind what Elio is talking about, is there were stories that Greg Scarpa was flown to Mississippi to help find bodies of, I believe, 3 students who were killed in a civil rights march in Mississippi by the Klan. Apparently they were killed. The FBI wanted someone to extract information from some people to find out where the bodies were so that they could at least bring the bodies home. And the story was that Greg Scarpa was hired to do that. Now, if we want to get into the exact story, here's the exact story. In the summer of 1964, field agents in Mississippi recruited Greg Scarpa to help them find missing civil rights workers Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner. The FBI had believed at the time that all 3 had been murdered, but they couldn't locate their bodies. So what the FBI did was they believed, because Greg Scarpa was particularly good at interrogation techniques, i.e. torture, that they thought he might be able to help. So according to the story, Scarpa arrives in Mississippi, was given a gun and money to pay for information. Scarpa, along with an agent, Scarpa, along with another FBI agent, pistol whipped and kidnapped Lawrence Byrd, who was a TV salesman and a Klansman, from his store and took him to Camp Shelby. And Camp Shelby was a local Army base outside of Mississippi. At Shelby Army Base, Scarpa beat Byrd and shoved a gun down his throat. Then Byrd revealed the location of the bodies. The problem with this story is that investigative journalists Jerry Mitchell and Barry Bradford found evidence suggesting that it was actually a highway patrolman, Maynard King, who was the one who gave the FBI the information, and he got it from the third-party source. I have seen those files, but the idea that Greg Scarpa somehow, the FBI decided, wow, in 1964, Greg Scarpa, wow, he's a dangerous, deadly guy. Let's hire him, take him to Mississippi, and let him whack around these guys for information. I don't believe it. I never have. I think Scarpa lies. I think Linda Shiro is lying her ass off about this story. That may be what Greg told her, little Linda, but I don't believe that to be the case, and this is the reason why. Greg Scarpa, till the end, was looking for a reason to try to deflect the fact that he was a fucking rat. That's the truth. That doesn't take away from who Greg Scarpa was. They called him the Grim Reaper for a reason, but the guy was a rat, and he was always, like every other rat, was looking to justify his contact with the FBI in case it got back to other people. That doesn't mean to say that Greg Scarpa wasn't somehow a tough guy, because he was. I think that's public record of who Greg Scarpa was. You don't get a name like the Grim Reaper for no fucking reason. The problem is that the 1964, the FBI could have used a million different other people for that sort of situation. They didn't need to go out and get an unknown Greg Scarpa to do that. I don't believe it. I think it's bullshit. I think it's lies. I'm not necessarily saying that Greg Scarpa made that up. He may have, or that Linda Shiro made that up. But the story is bullshit. It's false. It's not real. It doesn't exist. It was a story woven perhaps by Greg Scarpa to sort of give some sort of padded excuse as to why he had any kind of contact with the FBI, because of course he didn't want the mob to know he was ratting everybody out for 30 years, which is exactly what he did. So to me, if you really look at it for what it is, it's hardly believable in any sense of the word. In 1964, Greg Scarpa was not exactly the guy he was in, say, 84 or 74. So I think reality is that that's untrue. It didn't happen, and it was just a way for Greg Scarpa to get around not getting in trouble for talking to the FBI. So, Elio, I hope that answers your question. I could have been a lot more blunt about it, but at the end of the day, Greg Scarpa's a rat, and any time that a rat can sort of try to weave bullshit and innuendo into their storyline, they're going to do it because they want to take the heat off being a rat, and that's the way Greg was, and so from my perspective, I don't believe for a second, not for 1 second, that story is true. Not at all. Okay, moving right along. Ben Eberhard, once again. What makes a man so important in the life? Able to make money or keep his mouth shut? What's more important in your opinion? Someone who can be trusted or someone who makes money and won't talk? Mob 101. In this life, you are good at one or two things. You either earn or you can kill. Sometimes guys do both, but most of the time you're either one or the other. So the importance becomes, if you can kill, you have to be clean, you got to be quiet, nobody can find nothing, you got to keep your mouth shut. If you earn, you got to be able to manage your books, keep your mouth shut. Keep your mouth shut's the biggest thing in this whole topic. If it were me personally, the violent aspect of it, I'm not too fond of, but there is an end to justify the means anytime you talk about this stuff. But really, at the end of the day, the most important thing is you got to be able to trust the guy next to you, which you can't in that life. You can grow up with a guy 30 years, he's still going to kill you if he needs to, or if he thinks he needs to get over, or if he's told to kill you. He's going to kill you. Your best friend will kill you in this life, and that's the reality of the life. However, to say that one's more important, which is more important, your earning capacity or your violent streak? I mean, obviously, earning capacity, let me put it this way. You can be the biggest earner the mob has, and eventually somebody's going to eat you. And I say that because eventually someone's going to want to take what you have from you. So really, I would think it would benefit you more to be more violent, because guys might be less apt to come after you because they fear you. If they fear you, they won't move. They may try to move on you, but they're going to be apprehensive. Whereas if you're not a violent guy, you're a fucking pushover and you just make a lot of money, somebody eventually is going to swallow you and take your money. That's just the reality of it. So from my perspective, I think you need to be both. I think you need to be capable of being able to make some money to earn, but you also got to be violent. Violence speaks louder than earning the majority of the time. You know, I never met a guy in the streets that was earning a lot of money that was ever not scared. So that ought to tell you something. So hopefully that answers that one. Let's see. David Fitzgerald. I would like to know about Mad Dog Sullivan claiming responsibility for the murder of Anthony Caponigro, and did Richard Kuklinski work for Roy DeMeo? Let me get Richard Kuklinski out of the way first. Richard Kuklinski did not work for Roy DeMeo. They knew each other through the porn business. Richard Kuklinski was cutting porn and kind of splicing it together and selling it illegally. Roy essentially just moved in and took it away from him. But anything to try to confirm Richard Kuklinski's story of, I whacked Jimmy Hoffa, I was in a mob, I made whacks, I whacked people for Roy DeMeo is not true. And the simple case is that if you ask anybody that was in the Roy DeMeo crew, they have no idea who Richard Kuklinski is. Richard Kuklinski tried to say things about Sammy Gravano. Sammy Gravano didn't even know who the hell Richard Kuklinski was. Even the FBI went on record as saying he was not around Roy DeMeo. This guy was a serial killer, and people need to stop believing his bullshit fantasies and stories about being in a mafia, which was not the case. He was an out-and-out serial killer. Now, did he kill on behest of the mob? Absolutely not. He likes to tell that story. Richard Kuklinski killed people because he enjoyed killing people. Did he sell drugs? Did he do things for people? Sure, absolutely. He was a knockaround guy to a large extent. But every murder, with the exception of maybe one that he committed, was because he was crazy. Why people continuously seem to believe, and this is not knocking you, David, because this isn't directed at you, David Fitzgerald, at all. But I see this question a lot. People believe this guy. And I'm just here to tell you that the guy was full of shit. He was a serial killer. Hello, serial killer. Wasn't a gangsta. Wasn't a mafioso. He's a serial killer. That's the extent of his life. Now, he can twist that any way he wants. Because he knew Roy DeMeo, suddenly he's a gangster. I know Robert De Niro. Does that make me an actor? No, it doesn't. It's by proxy. As far as Mad Dog Sullivan claiming responsibility for the murder of Anthony Caponigro, we have to understand a couple of things. We have to understand the climate in Philadelphia at the time. We have to understand how Angelo Bruno was involved in this. We have to understand why Mad Dog Sullivan was called in to kill Caponigro. So, to answer your question simply, yes, Mad Dog Sullivan was responsible for the murder of Anthony Caponigro, which Antonio was actually his name, but I call him Anthony, I always have. But let's sort of look at the history of that for a second. First of all, this takes place in Philadelphia. Angelo Bruno, who was called the Docile Don, was the boss in Philadelphia at the time, and Anthony Caponigro was his consigliere at the time. So, now that we sort of understand that, we can move forward. At the time, Angelo Bruno was under indictment. He was starting to kind of get old and sickly, and Caponigro had a couple of issues. Caponigro felt that with the indictments, it was time to make a move. Secondary to this was sort of the fact that Caponigro wanted to move on the meth trade, methamphetamines. The rule was, via Angelo Bruno, that nobody in the Philadelphia Mafia would sell drugs. They weren't allowed. But it didn't stop Bruno from allowing Genoveses and Gambinos and God knows who else to come in and sell drugs. Sure, he took a profit from that, but he would allow them to do it, but then not allow his own guys to do it. And it really created kind of a problem for Caponigro because he saw the chance that he could make money. So Bruno was against the drugs, but allowed other crime families to come in North Jersey, Philly, and Newark to run drugs. Caponigro figured that if he killed Bruno, he'd at least have the support of the soldiers on the streets in Philly. So what Caponigro does is he goes to New York and he meets with Frank Thierry, who at the time was high up in the Genovese crime family. And Thierry at one time had rackets in Newark, in North Jersey, and in Philadelphia. But him and Caponigro sort of got into, they bumped heads years prior to this. And the reason why is because Thierry had moved in and started doing some rackets in North Jersey, and Caponigro had an issue with it because considering it was their territory, and he felt like this guy should pay him tribute or give him a percentage or just get the fuck out of New Jersey to begin with. And eventually what ends up happening is they have a commission meeting over this, and Angelo Bruno decides that Thierry was wrong and he needs to leave. So Thierry packs up his bags, goes back to New York, keeps his rackets outside of Philly, but Thierry never forgets it. And that's very important that you understand. Thierry never forgot that not only did Angelo Bruno essentially rule against him, but Caponigro, he felt, should have stood down. And that's going to come back to haunt Caponigro, believe me. So they have a sit-down. Bruno rules in favor of Caponigro. So what happens probably a decade later, when Caponigro starts to decide that Bruno's got to go, he reaches out to Frank Thierry about murdering Bruno. Thierry essentially tells him, yeah, go right ahead and don't worry. Go ahead and whack the guy. And if the commission comes at you, I'll take your back. I will stand up for you and say it needed to be done. I will agree with you. And Funzy Thierry had that sort of power. He could do that. So Caponigro starts to feel like, okay, well, he's effectively sanctioned this hit. So Caponigro goes back to Philly, really believing that Thierry's going to back him and that this is somehow sanctioned. I don't understand why he would think it was sanctioned, but it's probably because of Thierry's power at the time. So he brings in Alfred Salerno, John Simone, and Frank Sindone and tells them, kill Bruno. So Bruno's sitting in the car with John Stanfa, and I've always long thought that John Stanfa was involved in this. I can't prove it, but I think the reality is he was, and I'll tell you my reason after I tell you what happened. So Stanfa and Bruno are sitting in the car, and gunmen walk up and shoot Bruno point-blank range 6 times in the face, the head, the neck, kill him instantly. John Stanfa is shot, but they're just really sort of flesh wounds. And that's the reason why I always thought John Stanfa was in on this, because first of all, you're killing a boss of a family. You don't want witnesses. So why didn't they kill Stanfa? Are they that bad of a shot? Or was Stanfa somehow involved? I've always thought that Stanfa was involved in this. He sure as hell got some benefits out of Bruno leaving this earth. So I think it's safe to say that Stanfa was probably aware of what was going to happen. It was in on it to some extent. Can't prove it, but that's the way I sort of think it went down. So when the commission finds out that Bruno's been killed, they summon Caponigro to New York immediately because this hit was not sanctioned. And while he's having a meeting with Vincent the Gigante, and that's the other thing that people need to understand, is that this wasn't a commission meeting with all the heads of the families. This was essentially Vincent Gigante sitting in a room with Caponigro, because Gigante reached out to the rest of the commission and said, guys, I got this. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it. I'll take care of it. Not a problem. Don't concern yourself with this. And there was a reason why he wanted it that way, because Gigante was going to kill Caponigro. Gigante had a plan. He knew what was going to happen. And it was better for him to be in control of the situation than the rest of the families to be involved, because there could be some plausible accusations that would go around the room. So what ends up happening is Caponigro standing in there talking with Thierry and Gigante. And at some point, Caponigro starts to see that this meeting isn't going well, and he realizes that he's going to be in some serious trouble. So he finally turns to Thierry and says, wait a minute, you're the one that told me this was acceptable. You're the one that told me that I could do this. And in perhaps one of the more interesting... Wow, I just couldn't imagine being in this room and having Thierry turn around and saying, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I didn't okay this. I didn't say it was fine. In fact, I don't even agree with what you did. So the minute that Thierry says, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, Caponigro's fate is sealed. His fate was sealed before he even got there. He was going to be murdered. But there's sort of a reason. There's sort of a reason for that. And so effectively what ends up happening is Gigante off the record wanted to reshuffle Philadelphia anyway. They felt like more money could be made, things could be spread out. Gigante wanted to move more territory into Philadelphia and North Jersey. And so effectively, Caponigro's found in his trunk, shot 6 times, stabbed in the face, found money in his mouth, which was a sign to the rest of them that he became greedy. And no sooner does Caponigro get wiped out, Nicky Scarfo becomes boss. Nicky Scarfo had wanted that job from day one, and Nicky Scarfo was sent to Atlantic City because he was nuts. He stabbed a guy to death in a fucking diner with a butter knife over a seat. Little Nicky, what a funny guy he is. Oh, he's so funny. But the reality is that Bruno sent Nicky Scarfo out to Atlantic City to effectively shelve him, because he was a problem. He was violent. He couldn't get along with people. There was a high up in the mob that wanted Nicky Scarfo to marry his wife, and Nicky Scarfo says, "Are you kidding me? She looks like a fucking cross-eyed horse. I'm not going to marry a cross-eyed horse." And that didn't help issues. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of the whole tale, but Nicky Scarfo knew what was going to happen. Nicky Scarfo was definitely okay with it because he knew he was going to get the bump when Angelo Bruno went. But really, at the end of the day, what makes this even more interesting is that right after Caponigro is killed, Funzi Thierry is handed every single one of his rackets as a gift. So to say that the Chin didn't know what was going on he was oblivious to the fact that one of his own guys was involved in this is utter bullshit. I don't believe any of it. Once again, we see that Vincent Gigante is being absolutely shrewd as usual. And that's the way Gigante was, and that's the way Thierry was. And Caponigro got what he got. So they ended up making a call to Mad Dog Sullivan. Mad Dog Sullivan drives down to Philly and takes care of business. They went to him because they knew he would take care of it, and they wanted somebody from outside the family to do it, and that's exactly what happened. So to answer your question, we know why Anthony Caponigro was killed. We know who killed him and why he was killed. So hopefully that answers that question. The next question is, was Carlo Gambino, the only boss, able to avoid the police and FBI? If so, how was he so successful? Staying home at night? What made him different from the rest? First of all, Carlo Gambino looked like Geppetto. That had a lot to do with it. He looked like a grandfather from across the street. He did not look the part. He certainly did not act the part, at least publicly. He stayed inside, took care of his family, went to church. He did normal stuff. There was no $1 million car, no $1 million home, no $5,000 suits. The guy just stayed off the radar. That's why he wasn't arrested. And I'm going to tell you something. When you have the respect of 100 men, and not just having the respect, but they fear you as well, they have a tendency of staying in line and not telling. And I've always said this, and I always will, and perhaps maybe I'm wrong, but one of the best ways of looking at the longevity or the power of a mob boss is by looking at how many informants they have. They're always going to have some, but when Carlo Gambino was the head of that family, you look, it's not many. When guys are no longer hungry and they are fed till their bellies are full, they're content. And Carlo Gambino was the type that believed that you give your men enough to survive, enough to feel like they're attaining things, but you never give them too much where they want more. Because when you want more, you will take more. So it's sort of the theory of wetting the beak. Make everybody content, let everybody earn, but always make them want to need you. If guys on the street need you to survive, then they're going to be loyal to you. The minute that they're making more than you and they don't need you to survive is when they stab you in the back. And that's essentially the truth. And if you read Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, there's a lot of discussion in the book about how to keep your men content in times of duress and stuff like that. And it's a great philosophy, and it's a wonderful book. But Gambino was very Machiavellian in the way that he did things. In fact, if you're sort of trying to figure out where organized crime gets a lot of their beliefs and structure, read The Prince. You will be amazed you'll say, oh, wait a minute, now I get it, because they're doing this and that. I see. So it's a good book to read. It's the roadmap of the Mafia as far as I'm concerned. But Gambino stayed off the radar just because he was quiet. He was quiet, reserved. He spoke softly, but when he needed somebody to get clipped, believe me, it was going to get done. And it's not so much that he was the only one. There were several that were able to sort of stay off the radar for a long time, but eventually the truth is you always get caught up. Gambino, I think, was arrested once. faked a heart ailment to get out of courtroom procedures for that. But the reality is you can't ever totally stay off the radar of the FBI and the police. But he was able to because he insulated himself incredibly well, you know. And let's see. Final question from Scott Collier. I feel like I'm a basketball announcer over here. Who is the most evil gangster from the five families and why? I don't really have an answer to that, and I hate to say that because I always have an answer for everything, it seems. But the most evil, I mean, there's Tommy Patera, Mad Sam DiStefano, Tommy DeSimone, Greg Scarpa. Those are four, Anthony Center. Those are 4 of the 5 of the most gruesome fucks you're ever going to see in the mob. And I can't pick one because it's like, okay, you take Mad Sam DiStefano, right? He's a serial killer. Tommy Patera ends up a serial killer at the end of the day. Greg Scarpa effectively ends up a sociopath and a serial killer. Anthony Center helped chop up bodies, serial killer. So really, Roy DeMeo even. So how do you pick one out of that bunch? That's like looking at all the monsters and going, all right, which one of these fucks is the most disturbing? They're all disturbing to me, you know, except for that poor Marilyn. She was like the normal one of the bunch. So which one of the monsters would you guys pick? Even Abe Rellis, going back in the day, was brutal. Anastasia was brutal. Murder Inc. was brutal. So really, at the end of the day, how can you pick one? How can you pick one? But just to suffice this and just to get it down to the nitty gritty here, I think probably the most disturbing individual is Greg Scarpa. Not necessarily because of maybe his technique, because I think there are certain guys that did some other torturous type of shit that was a lot more evil than that. This guy didn't care. I don't think any of them did, but it was just the amount of it. First of all, it takes an incredible human being to get shot in the fucking face with your eyeball hanging out, come back to the house, drink a scotch, go right back out of the house again to kill somebody. That's some tough stuff there. Listen, I don't know about anybody else, but my eyeball's sticking out of my fucking head. I'm probably not drinking scotch. I'm probably going to the hospital, and I'm certainly not thinking about going after the people that just shot at my kid or me. So, but if I could say anything, he's probably the guy that scares me the most out of the bunch. Just the look. Like Mad Sam, you look at him, he looks fucking nuts. Okay, yeah, he's nuts. You look at Greg Scarpa and some of the videos I've seen, he just is off. Like, there's something about him that's just off. I think Elio would tell me, oh, that's your intuition telling you he's crazy or whatever, but there's just something just off center, off to the left about him that tells me you just don't fuck with this one. But do I think he was the most dangerous? Absolutely. Out of the bunch, absolutely. Because he was the most powerful of the bunch I just mentioned. He was bigger than DeMeo, bigger than Center, bigger than Patera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he was also the biggest informant of the bunch. So for my money, Scott, my answer is going to be Greg Scarpa. I think he was the most deadly of the bunch. Torture was not a problem for him. Definitely running out the house with his eyeball in his hand wasn't a big problem for him either. So that is my answer to that question. So with that, we are at the end of the questions here, and I wanted to just kind of thank everybody. Sorry I rambled for 44 minutes about this, but sometimes you got to take your time and answer questions. If I missed your question, which I'm looking at a sheet right now just to make sure that I did not miss anybody's questions, because I would feel absolutely horrible if I did. It looks like I got all of them. So we will do, if you guys like this kind of thing, we will definitely do another Q&A at some point. All you have to do is come over on Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio in the search bar, send us a message, shoot us your question, hit us up on Twitter at RealMobTalk7, and keep the questions coming. I try to answer things as quick as I can on the internet. Sometimes, some days are better than others. But if you guys like this kind of thing, then we'll definitely keep doing it. I like answering questions. But I've got to get to the big show today, and that's what's coming next. So I wanted to thank everybody for every question you submitted. Hopefully I answered them at least halfway to what you wanted. But let me get out of here because I got the Carlos Marcello show today, and that's going to be humongous. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for submitting questions. We'll talk to everybody later. Peace out.